Greetings from Stony Brook University. My name is Stacy Aquero, and I am here to talk to you today about writing a successful application essay. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about what kinds of different essays there are. And when thinking about writing an essay, there are a couple of different types of essays. Those types of essays can be one, the personal statement, which really is exactly what it states, is something that's personal to you. It's telling the admissions committee a little bit about yourself, and really just speaking from a perspective of all about you. Another type of essay is why you specifically want to go to that particular college you are applying to. In this case, it is less universal, and obviously very specific to that institution you're applying to. It's not just about who you are and maybe the fact that that school has your major, but really getting into specifics and specific research that you've done on that particular institution, maybe about faculty, clubs and organizations, the location, particular classes that are being taught, other kinds of specifics for that university. Another type is called intellectual curiosity. This can be one of two types of essays. One, it might ask you a very specific academic related question that you need to submit, or it may ask you to submit an already written academic type of essay. It could be a little research based where you'll have to have a variety of different sources. It could be a graded paper as well, so something that you've already submitted that has been graded by a faculty member or a high school teacher. But oftentimes it may be specific to that university and they are asking you to write on a specific academic subject. Oftentimes, universities will also ask about a favorite activity. I always recommend that, of course, the majority of that is talking about that activity and involvement you have, perhaps any event planning or leadership roles. But you may also want to connect it to your plans in the future. You don't necessarily have to be involved in that activity after high school, but what if some of the things you've learned that you are going to then continue to use in your everyday life or at university? The next question I get oftentimes when thinking about starting to prepare for your essay writings is, how many essays do I have to write? And that really depends on the school. Some schools will have what's known as that personal statement, which is really just writing a little bit about yourself, but then we'll have a secondary essay, or what's known as a primary essay, your first essay, where you again are writing an answer to a specific question along with that personal statement. Other universities will have just one essay, but may have some supplemental essays for honors programs or scholarships, or even in some cases, supplemental essays might be more short answer than full on essays. So it really will vary school to school. And it's really important to make sure that even though some essays are universal for multiple schools that you are applying to, that you are making sure that it is that universal essay that you've done, again, that personal statement perhaps, can be used each time you're applying, depending on what that school is specifically asking for. Again, there can be additional essays depending on the school. In particular, a lot of times an honors application essay will be very specific to the school and to the honors program. A scholarship essay will be specific to what that scholarship is and what they're looking for. Supplemental essays could be very specific also to that school, and we're going to have a few examples of that later on. So really, what is the difference between a personal statement versus an essay? And a personal statement, again, is really about yourself versus a specific question. So in an essay, you will be asked a very specific question or to choose from a number of different prompts. Oftentimes, it is still weaving personal information into that essay. Most of the time, your essays in admissions are still tend to be pretty personal, and the admissions committee wants to know about you as a person. But whereas a personal statement is really kind of giving um, a little bit more of information that is not on your application, that's talking about who you are as a person in terms of your character, things that you like, maybe things that you don't like, um, uh, your interests in school, your interests outside of school, maybe even a little bit about your family dynamic or any kind of personal circumstances that you may want to share. The personal statement can talk about why you want to attend that university, especially because that's a personal choice. And so this is particularly, again, where I say you will need to adjust that per university you are applying to. It may also include why you want to study a particular major. And if you're applying to different majors at different schools, again, this is where you will have to adjust those essays per school that you are writing to. So it's really important to make sure that you are tailoring each essay to each school that you are applying to. So let's talk a little bit about some general rules for when applying to schools and writing essays. In general, um, essays should speak about elements that are not covered in your application. So while a personal statement is talking about yourself and your interests and who you are as a person, it should not be a list of your activities. It should not be a list of courses you've taken, things that are very known on your application. The other thing is that you really want your voice to be heard. And oftentimes people tend to write maybe more elaborate than their speaking voice, or their 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 ability to write is less than what they feel is appropriate vocabulary. But you really want that voice to be heard. It's very clear sometimes when reading an essay when it's not a 17-year-old student writing it, if it's a parent or other kinds of influences that are rewriting sentences or recommending a variety of different other angles to that. We really want to understand who you are as a person, and writing that from your voice will help really in the next area is market yourself in the best way. So we do think that it's important to not only use your own voice, but to make sure that when you're marketing yourself in the best way, you're really putting yourself in the most positive light. So of course, sometimes, and we'll see in a few moments, some of the essay prompts may talk about things like obstacles you've had to overcome or a negative situation. However, you always want to turn it to the positive. So what are the positive things you've learned? How did you turn that negative into a positive? So you always want to stay more in the positive when doing anything in that respect. And this is the opportunity where you are going to talk more about who you are academically. So we can certainly see from the grades and the transcripts, the classes you've taken, and what kind of grades you have in there, but this is an opportunity to talk more about who you are outside of the classroom. So here are some best tips that I believe are extremely helpful to most students. One is answer the question. And again, we're going to go through a couple of essay prompts in a moment. But oftentimes, students will submit an essay and they didn't necessarily answer the question. Um, and of course, you want to be able to show that you can follow directions and answer the question. Use the word limit and don't go over too much. In fact, on many uh, standardized applications, the essay word count will cut off your application. So if it's over, so if it's say 500 words and you have 600 words and you cut and paste it from your Word document into this application system, it may cut off the end of your essay, therefore not even submitting the full essay. So you really want to be careful about that. And so sometimes students don't even realize that when they're cutting and pasting that, and then it's incomplete and is not a good showing at all. I talked about this in the last slide, but it's so important to use your words and use your voice and not use, again, that voice of someone else. And that goes side by side with don't overuse thesaurus. So even if, your mom is telling you to change words and you're like, no, this is how I write, this is how I speak, I know this is what's best. You don't want to overuse thesaurus where it doesn't make sense and in the natural flow of writing. Again, you don't want to overlist your activities. When answering a lot of these questions, as broad as some of these questions are, you really want to stick to kind of one subject, and that'll make more sense when we go through some of the prompts, but it's not sort of listing all of your accomplishments. So if you're talking about overcoming an obstacle and you're talking perhaps about the fact that your obstacle maybe was that you did not get elected to become the president of student government, and how you overcame that obstacle was maybe you found a new passion of the chess club, and that's great. And then you talk about things that you did in the chess club, but it's not an opportunity to say, because I did not get to be president of student government, I now joined these 10,000 clubs that you already see on my application. It's just to talk about that specific topic that you're focusing on. Your essay should have a logical flow to its message. That's really just great essay writing technique in general, where you want to always have a logical flow of your message and make sure that flow is connecting. Proofread and have somebody else proofread. Having someone else proofread sometimes is where that disconnect of using your own voice comes in, because people try and change a sentence altogether or reword things or reorganize things, but it's really meant for grammar, spelling, and any feedback to expand on something. Maybe this doesn't make sense, maybe you're veering off you're tangenting to a different area, but not rewriting your essay. So those are the things that proofreading does. One of the things that I often, I was given this suggestion back when I was a graduate student. I kind of wish I would have known it as an undergraduate student. So now my piece of advice to all students when I talk about proofreading is to do two things. Of course, you're reading it from front to bottom, and that's going to help you make sure that it's in that logical flow. But if you have any kind of syntax or grammar or spelling errors, it's often hard to catch all of them when you're reading it top to bottom, because as the creator, once you're you're reading something you've already written, you're reading it as you know it's supposed to sound. And so if you forget a word or mistype a word, it's not always easy to catch, even with spell check and grammar check and all of those things. So while it is something that takes a long time to do, I recommend reading each sentence from the bottom of your essay to the top. And this will help make sure that each sentence is free of any errors. Again, it is definitely time consuming, but it is something I recommend for all essays, especially if for anyone who has any kind of struggles with sentence structure or grammar. And so it's really great for my international students because English oftentimes is their second language and just makes a lot of sense to do so. Another tip, of course, is to submit by the deadline. Submissions after the deadline at most schools means that it's not part of your application package, and therefore in a scoring rubric could be very low. A couple of other tips would be, if your essay starts in the past, you want to get to the present a little quickly. Colleges want to know about the person you are today. They can weave in the past, of course, if there's been an influence that was through your young childhood, but you want to make sure you're making it relevant to today and who you are today. So I always give the example of a grandparent maybe who passed away when you were young. Maybe you struggled, maybe they were some kind of, again, influence, and you talk about the person who you are today because of that influence. You also want to write in the first person. Do not spend more than about 30% or a third of your essay describing anything other than you, your goals, your activities, how it helped you. You also only want to tell one story. You don't want to tell multiple stories. This is that don't be listing your activities. If your school requires more than one essay, so that personal statement, that primary essay, that supplemental essay, you want to write more. You need to write a new story each time. So if you're writing about your community service and you're writing about a particular club or event that you've done in the community, and now you're writing a personal statement and you want to talk about how involved you are, you don't want to focus on that same community service event. You need to kind of write new stories. I also like to give some tips about what not to do. You don't want to write anything that may be inappropriate or have illegal content. And that's kind of self-explanatory, so I don't think I need to go much into that. You also don't want to insult or blame anyone. I often sometimes see in personal statements, sometimes students will take an opportunity to write about something that negatively influenced them and how they turn that to positive, but that negative sometimes turns into my teacher did something, didn't give me a good grade, and it's all their fault, or a family member or something. And while you can explain the situation, it's typically easier not to give insult or blame, but explain what happened to you. If you're, I always give the bad grade example. If you got a bad grade, you got the bad grade, and what did you do positively to affect that, or how did it affect change going forward, versus I got a bad grade because the teacher did a terrible job. And so that also goes into the next one about don't make any excuses. Focus on, instead of what the mistake was, how you learned from that mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. No one is perfect. colleges know that no one is perfect. So it's really about the learning experience and what became of you. A very common mistake in essays, especially when talking about why you want to go to that school, why you want to major at something in that school, is people spell the college name wrong or don't switch out the college name. Unless you are specifically putting why you want to go to that college in an essay, if it is a more general common application essay, then it's probably easier not to include that information at all. Of course, you don't want to write anything that's not true. Schools that will have interviews, you can count on them having to ask you questions based on your essay. So you will need to be able to elaborate more on some of those items when you're in an interview. And my last tip is not a do not write on controversial topics such as politics. I should probably alter that a little bit to a be cautious. And when I say that, it's because you want to write it from a perspective where you are being respectful of somebody who has opposing views than you. So I always tell students when writing anything that may be considered controversial, that you should write it understanding that the reader may have the opposing view, and that it needs to be respectful enough where somebody with the opposing view can still appreciate that essay. So I want to just take a moment and talk about a few supplemental essays from other schools that may, or from a variety of different schools in the US that you may have and can kind of help you understand what you may need to write about. One of my favorites is beyond your impressive credentials and extracurricular accomplishments, what else makes you unique and colorful? We know nobody fits neatly into 500 words or less, but can you provide us with some suggestions of the type of person you are? Anything goes, inspire us, impress us, or just make us laugh. Think of this optional opportunity as show and tell by proxy with an attitude. The thing that I love about this is it's basically asking for a personal statement. They want to know more about you. It doesn't fit neatly into their 500-word kind of, they probably are using the common application essay prompts, which we're going to get to next. But it really talks about, tell us anything about you, but be as creative as possible. So it doesn't have to be a traditional essay. You can write it in poetry if you want to, and really kind of explain who you are. The next example is something that I also think is really interesting. This is saying that the academic community at XYZ school, that's fictional, is shaped by the unique talents, characters, and personalities of each student. Finish each sentence in 75 characters or less, so they can learn about you. So in lieu of a personal statement, they'll just, again, have you write an essay, but they want to learn about you through things that you're fascinated by, what your favorite books are, what you wish for in 5 years, but you have to do it in 75 characters or less. That's not 75 words, that's characters. Characters include punctuation and space. So just think about how you are explaining these things in that short of a character count. For this one, this may be old. I didn't check for this year, but for Harvard in the past, they've asked out of their international students, what specific plans do you have for using your education you hope to receive from Harvard in 50 words? So you have to really specifically know what you want to study, why at Harvard, and what you are going to do when you graduate with that education. So these are just some examples and the limitations that it has. For anyone watching this, I definitely encourage you to do a couple of these for practice throughout the summer as well. Is a great time from your junior year to your senior year to start writing some of these. These are the common application essay prompts from 23-24. And I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see that they are broad enough where when applying to multiple schools on the common application, you can utilize them from school to school. And then other schools may have additional essays or supplemental essays. You can see they're broad enough where they talk a lot about your background and identity. So a lot of times that is coupled a little bit with a personal statement you might have already written. I've mentioned this prompt a lot throughout this presentation of obstacles we've encountered. And again, you're going to talk about how the positive side of that, what you learned, what you've done since then. Reflect on a time when you've questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was your outcome? So this one, again, you're going to always want to sort of flip to the positive side. When you challenge that belief, what was the positive impact? Maybe it was a policy at school that was, very old, and you were able to talk to the school and administrators and get something changed. Reflect on something that someone has done that made you happy. What motivated you? Discuss an accomplishment or a realization that sparked personal growth. So it's not just about that accomplishment, but how have you grown since then? So make sure you're answering all parts of that question. And then the last one is an essay of your choice. So at the end of the day, if none of these kinds of prompts are something that's calling to you, you can always respond to your own kind of written prompt or essay. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. Again, I'm from Stony Brook University. Just a little bit of information about us. We're a large public research university in New York, part of the State University of New York system, the #1 public in New York, and the flagship of the New York State system, the SUNY system. We're also ranked in the top 1% of universities in the world. Over 26,000 students on campus, over 200 majors, about an hour from New York City, in a very suburban residential community, very safe community, train station right on campus, offering over 200 academic majors and programs and scholarships for international students. We use the Common Application, as well as the Coalition application and the SUNY application. For fall 25. We have an early action deadline of November 1st and our regular application deadline of January 15th. And for more information, you can always email us or scan this QR code and sign up for more information. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great day.